What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another Xibalba dev stream. Every other day, here at the same YouTube channel, at the same YouTube time, i.e. whenever I feel like it, we do these streams all the time. And yeah, well, we're making some progress. Pretty considerable progress, I might add, with the Ember Seat tech map looking pretty solid for the first two tiers. Certainly some more stuff could be populated in that second tier, but we'll continue fleshing it out over time. However, almost immediately, I would like to jump into the Sycora tech map, because these guys are going to be the subject of the next campaign planning that I'm doing, as they are the protagonists, you could say, the faction of choice, the regency of choice, for the first proper campaign. And with the tutorial planning coming along on the tutorial section of the map, you'll notice that we have, indeed, a pretty high quantity of planning already done, which means I've only got to plan out one more mission before this is mostly taken care of, at least in the first draft phase, where I can then keep going back and editing it over time to trim the fat and make sure everything is just as I want it. So that means we're going to be entering into the draft phase of the Sycora campaign very soon, and that means I would like to get a little bit more understanding of their tech map and how the opening tiers are going to look, especially in terms of like early progression. That will allow me to pick a strong mission outline and design a strong mission outline for that ever important first map of the Sycora campaign, because then I'll be able to know, like, okay, here's what the race is strong at, here's what the Regency can really excel at, and here's what maybe a player who's never played the game before and never played this race before, here's what they can actually do with without too much struggle. And one of them is obviously, goes without saying when you're trying to make an easier map, is really biasing the terrain in favor of the player. That will almost certainly occur. And I think you'll also probably have an AI ally here, because we want to give this a somewhat similar treatment to the first Ansifi tutorial mission, where you actually have a more veteran commander with you. And so we're going to follow that little formula, if you will, except this time you will be expected to be a little bit more active than you were in the tutorial mission. So there will probably be maybe like a 2v1v1 scenario going on, where you get a little bit of free-for-all, but it's almost like an on-rails free-for-all in terms of biasing the difficulty in favor of the player. They still have to play an RTS to win. If they do nothing, they'll lose. If they don't do well enough, they'll also lose. But it's setting the stage for something that we can develop into a much more difficult thing. And it's almost like an onboarding map, an introductory map for the entire Regency, as you'll not see it at all in the opening sections of the tutorials. When you're playing through the first 5 missions that are going to be designed for this game, you won't have access to the Sycora as enemies, as allies, as obviously your own faction. So playing as these guys is really going to be a very interesting experience, and I would say an exercise in expanding one's horizons. So as we get right into this, we can talk a little bit about where I want to go with the Sycora tech map itself. I think right now we're in an okay position for the opening tiers, but I do have my concerns about locking the Schism and thus the entire Severed branch behind the Intrusion. Specifically, the fact that the Intrusion is so expensive makes me feel like, I don't know, it is worthwhile, because obviously, unlike other regencies, the Sycora don't actually have interdependent tech restrictions. You get one structure and it unlocks an entire tier's worth of units and structures. And then you get another structure and it does the same exact thing. So that's basically how their tech progression actually works. As a result of that, though, I do think we need to maybe shuffle some things around here. One of the things I was thinking is actually moving the Reliquary up to tier 2, and thus unlocking a host of units from not just the Martyrium, but also, again, from the Reliquary. You'd start to get access to some things that are from that particular structure, which will be a little confusing in the tech map side of things, because the Anito and the Oroti are going to be unlocked by the Martyrium, or they're going to be trained at the Martyrium, I should say, but they'll be right beneath the Reliquary if I do decide to make that change. Even so, this is just one of the things I'm considering. Another thing that's pretty obvious is that we could incorporate something into the Manifest, or some sort of utility unit that would further allow Tier 1 to have some sort of gameplay, but this might just be one of those things where you... It might just be one of those things where you have to, decide to go for a certain tier of of play before you can have a massively robust composition. And even still, you have access to 7 units that could be construed as combatants. The Kitoros doesn't have a weapon, but besides that, all of these have some combat capability. The idea that you wouldn't be able to field a competitive composition at tier 1, that concept actually fits the Sycora, but for another, I don't actually know how true that really is. It does bias the race in favor of taking an early expansion and macroing up, and maybe disproportionately so to a degree that would be unwanted. But I suppose we might have to see how that actually plays out. What's up, Veek, Knight of the Realm, and Milestone? That's 3 people who joined in the time it took me to finish my thought, so that's pretty funny. 3. How you guys doing? Today we'll be obviously working on the Sycora tech map if you couldn't figure that one out already. Is it possible to spec to tier 3 without tier 2? An interesting idea. I haven't exactly thought about that. I was thinking that it would be a linear sequence. However, the idea of, locking everything behind a specific tech structure, but then not locking the tech structures themselves behind anything is kind of interesting. And it would almost like allow you to separate in your mind, when I get this, I'm getting, everything at this branch, everything at this tier. But I'm getting everything, so I have to decide what I want. And then I guess that it would add more value to the concept of like, okay, so mixing and matching between the different tech tiers is actually still useful, because if I get tier 3, I'm going to unlock units from the Schism, which I won't actually have access to if I don't have tier 2. That can be seen as clunky and weird and obtuse, but I think maybe it just unlocks more potential if you wanted to rush to tier 3 because you get the empath tech structure upgrade, So I have to think about that, because that would conceptualize this as a setup where you get the next level in tech structure, but you needed the previous one that you leapfrogged over in order to access something in between. You know what I mean? Yeah, linear progression makes sense, but the not all regencies will have that. For example, the Embassy does not plan to have linear progression in the same sense at all. Instead, they have embassies which require representative breakpoints, which each embassy provides a certain number of them. So theoretically, because you have access to the Reeton Embassy, the Perilli Embassy, and the Rillier Embassy, it is possible, and the Escosi Embassy, it's possible that what you could do is get the Reeton and the Perilli, and then the Escosi, completely ignore the Rilliar, and that would give you the 4 representatives necessary for the Totaran one, as an example. If I were to add a 4th tier 1 embassy, it would be possible to ignore the Escosi Embassy and still get the breakpoint for Totaran. That probably will not happen just because I don't want to overload tier 1, but there will be another tier 2 embassy that you can get instead of the Escosi, so it's not like you're forced into them. But I'll think about how that works out. Maybe just one of these tier 2 ones is more expensive, or tier 1 embassies is more expensive and provides 2. But anyway, that's just like an initial point. That means that you can just choose which embassies you want to unlock, and if you have enough representatives from your embassies, you can just go straight to the top and skip entire tiers of tech. So yeah, all in all, each regency being able to scale up their tech tree in their own ways, I think is, or express the power of the intrinsic to their tech tree in their own ways. That is a key sort of balancing lever, but also conceptual lever that I can use to keep the regencies distinct. How do you feel about Champions of Candia, Veek, now that you have played through that Candyland campaign? I actually thought I had way less units for the Sycora than I did, but that's because I think I forgot. I did do a lot of units for the Ember Seed, I suppose. It's 5, 10, 15, 18. Yeah, so this one, there's 15 units for the Sycora. If you add in the workers, if I were to get like 2 extra worker concepts, that would bridge the gap pretty well, obviously. So that's probably where the bulk of the difference is. I feel nothingness. They call that the destruction of a man. No, that's not a unit. That's the main villain. I hope you at least enjoyed me spawning ends on a dude to kill him. That was pretty good. I did just realize, though, once we get resource harvesting mechanics into the game and unit training and building production, I'll actually be able to test how the resource breakpoints actually feel and how it feels to like scale through the tech tree, even if I'm just playing on an empty map by myself. That will actually be quite useful for that, even if I am using a bunch of like recycled assets or whatever. That's not that big of a deal. So, let's get ourselves situated here. I did want to, I've got to close out the Ember Seat stuff and go to Sycora. So I want to take the intrusion, and I do want to indeed lower its cost a bit. The other thing I was thinking about here is that so I was thinking about moving the Reliquary up to tier 2. The trouble is I don't actually know. This is where we get into a bit of an interesting. I think I will make it so that it's linear tech progression, in that you do need tier 2 to get tier 3 and so on, because otherwise it doesn't really synergize very well with itself. If I wanted to do something like unlock units at the Schism at tier 3, and you just jump to tier 3, and then you don't actually get to benefit from one of the main reasons why you spent so much money on a tier 3 tech structure. So oh, yeah. Well, yeah, that version of AI debug is an old one, and I can't use the new one because it handles a bunch of stuff that's like specific to Cosmonarchy, like not like it renders upgrades differently in the AI town and stuff. I didn't want to add it because I wasn't sure if it would break anything. So even if it might not, you know how vulnerable Brood War is to just being super fragile. So let's move the Reliquary up to tier 2, actually, with the idea that we are indeed going to have conventional, like this sort of linear tech progression. I think that's probably pretty fine. We can move Reliquary to tier 2, and then we can start coming up with units that would be trained out of the Reliquary. Now, I did want to make it very clear in the early stages of the development of the Sycora that they don't have conventional separation between infantry, vehicles, and spacecraft that the NCFI do. The Ember Seat also don't really have that, but it's kind of, they muddy the waters a little bit, you could say. Like, they have like a walker, they have a droid, they have some infantry units, and they have like a vulture-type bike sort of unit, like a hovercraft. Well, it's not a hovercraft in this case, it will have wheels and stuff. And that sort of thing, excuse me, is, what would you call that? That's, all of that is trained from a single structure. So the Ember Seat sort of play around with those boundaries, but the Sycora just have no boundaries in that respect. They will all pretty much always have the same sort of thing going on, where they've got some craft, they've got some infantry, they've got some fighters, and the craft, by craft I meant vehicles. So they've got like land vehicles, they've got some hovering stuff. Actually, I don't know. Do they have any hoverers? Looks like not yet. At least not in the... Wait. Yeah, I guess they don't have any hoverers, actually. Yeah, it looks a little bit more blurred around the edges, in the console at least. Should probably rename the solution from Dreamhold to either Antikythera or just Cosmonarchy, but that's not really that big of a deal, I guess. It certainly is a lot less aliased, which is nice, because that means that I don't have to worry about like figuring out what it means. But I noticed that when I was typing in here, it's a bit difficult to focus. Could also add a quit and exit command that both do the same thing. Because I guess quit would probably be the most sensible one, but no, I guess I use exit in CS:GO, so whatever. Doesn't matter as long as I know what one it is. Yeah. I've been doing a lot of work on my campaign video, which is why I played those shit campaigns so many times. Come on. Load the changes, idiot. Oh. would be helpful if I actually push the changes, idiot. And that is the commit message for this particular commit. All right. So now we have the intrusion. Oh yeah, I guess I should link the reliquary to require Sycora be intrusion. If I go back to the intrusion, we can say that this enables reliquary. I suppose I won't have to do that at all in the future because it'll just be auto-genned. Oh, I'm typoed it. Owned. There you go. We did it. So, beyond that, I think we should probably aim to just flush out tier 2, specifically with the addition of the reliquary. We probably want to add 2 or 3 units at tier 2 that the reliquary can train that'll be pretty useful, not just in combination with the other branches, but maybe also consider allowing that combination to be really good with martyriums. The question is, since you're upgrading the production facility, do we actually want it to completely change the number of units that you can train? I feel like we probably do. Changing all of the units that are trainable is a little bit more like understandable, so you don't have to remember like, oh yeah, I'm playing against a Sycora player and he's got a reliquary, which means he can train some units from the martyrium. I don't remember which ones. Like, that would just be annoying, right? So I think just when you see a reliquary, knowing that you can expect completely different units from it, regardless of whether or not it's yours, your opponents, your allies, is a pretty important IMO. So let's do that. Now, because of the name Reliquary, I do kind of want to... I want to design some units that are a little bit more on the side of... I would like to design some units that are more on the side of slightly older technology that's been reinvented for retrofitted. I guess retrofitted probably implies that it's been fitted with some older equipment, so probably not. I guess that could be it too. It could be new technology that uses some old technology to exist in this universe or something. But that doesn't really make much sense because I'm pretty sure they would have to develop new technology to exist here. So let me just add in some more unit names to my list of unit names. I wrote some down on my phone yesterday. Okay. I don't think I'll be using any of the... Oh, maybe one of them I could use. It would have to be a... Oh, actually, that... Yeah, never mind. It would have to probably be an infrastructure unit. All right, let's take stock of what units we actually have access to now. So at tier 2, we've got access to a whole host of units from the martyrium. So you actually have to pick between upgrading your martyriums to unlock a completely new set of units, or just using the martyriums to train new units. I have not played Dishonored. I think I tried to play it, and in the first 5 minutes, I glitched the game so bad that I think I fell out of the world or something, and then I just left, just quit the game. But I think I own it, so maybe I'll play it at some point. But feel free to post it in the not gay enough, or what's it called now? Is it still called not gay enough? Oh yeah, it is. But yeah, feel free to dump it somewhere anyway. Might generate some buzz from people who have played it. I think maybe Chalks talked about playing it a long time ago. I don't really remember though. The other question that I have for myself at this point is how frequently am I going to change what units are available or what production? Yeah, how frequently am I going to change production facility availability? Because if the reliquary is only, I mean, well, I guess it's kind of pricey actually. I might remove the hypervial cost from the reliquary and make it so that you pay twice the cost of a martyrium. Well, you pay the same cost of a martyrium to get a reliquary. It would be slightly longer. I think that might actually make some sense now that I think about it. I mean, obviously it had costs associated with a presumed tier 3 thing at first. Address the arguments on stream. Have some mega insane game of telephone. I kind of like that idea. That is pretty funny. The trouble is I don't think you can address arguments coming from people who have only played mainstream RTS titles. Like if you wanted to have an experience playing a single player real-time strategy game, single player real-time strategy content of any kind that actually challenged you and expected you to play the game, and not in a way where it was like, oh, can you beat all of my spawned waves in ? If it was actually trying to compete with your time as a product, you basically had to go play an obscure Brood War mod that was released like 20 years after the Brood War game itself came out. Like, who's doing that? Not very many people. I think maybe Cosmonarchy Brood War had, we'll be generous and say it probably got to triple digits in terms of unique people who played the game, played the mod. But they played it at various times, probably. Some of them maybe played it before the rebrand. Who knows? The point is that counterexample doesn't exist in most people's minds. They haven't played something that requires you to go up against competent enemies, and they certainly haven't played content like One for the Future, the birthday campaign series, where there's even transmissions going on, and there's, it's not just what people would say glorified skirmish content. It is actually going to have some sort of imbalanced map scenario, imbalanced team scenario where it's like a 2v1v1 or something crazy, a team free-for-all, stuff like that. They haven't played anything of scale, and they haven't played anything that actually competes for their time. What can you possibly say? What can you possibly provide for them? You basically have to sell them on the argument from the spoken word alone. That's all you can do. Because if you try to take it a step further and say, well, here's an example, I mean, unless they actually want to opt into that experience in the first place, and in Cosmonarchy Brood War's case, it does admittedly involve blocking it from Windows Defender and repairing it from your antivirus and setting up an older version of Brood War. And these aren't really complicated hoops to jump through, but they are still hoops to jump through. Like, at some point, if you want to really change more than just a few people's minds at a time, if you want to provide something where the average consumer could at least check it out and see what you were talking about, I mean, you can't really point to an obscure Brood War mod, unfortunately. You can point to some documentation that only a few people are going to bother reading because they're just simply not invested, which is totally understandable. You can try to sell them on the promise, on the idea, maybe point to some video content of people playing it. But again, unless you can put a product that's easy for them to experience themselves in front of them, you're not really going to be able to sell them on it. And unfortunately, the only product that currently exists, to my knowledge, that actually competes for your time in its single-player content, and isn't just a glorified gimmick simulator. You want to talk about glorified things? That StarCraft 2's campaign is a fucking nightmare. It's just non-stop changes of pace and complete changes of stakes and scale, and the writing is obviously off the wall. Like, good luck ever getting invested in a product like that. But you want to have a counterexample to be able to put in front of them. Like, that's what you have to do. And well, you know what? Come back, watch this space. Come back in about a year. We'll see what you can do. We'll see. You'll see some things, man. You'll see some things. If I had to change somebody's mind about StarCraft 2 being the pinnacle of RTS mission design, I would just have them play, I guess, the Brood War campaigns, because they're not really that great, but they are much better than StarCraft 2, just by virtue of, like, the developers were actually limited in how many things they could do to fuck the game flow. So, you know, that says a lot. Really, I don't ascribe like value to the experience, but you want to play a better single player RTS game than StarCraft 2, just play its predecessor. Even the Brood War campaigns themselves, which were shit shows, actually had more RTS gameplay in them. And that's the biggest thing, is you can't even say StarCraft 2 has RTS missions, because it doesn't. It doesn't have RTS gameplay in it. It has gameplay where you cosplay as an RTS player, because, you know, you've got some units and you've got to move them around, and sometimes you got to build more of them, especially on the brutal difficulty. Sometimes you have to build more than 2 units. You have to build 3 units, and that's how you defeat the enemy, because the objectives never involve actually defeating your opponent. In fact, when you move into an enemy base, you get a bunch of transmissions saying, hey, player, Blizzard doesn't want you to be engaging with your opponent because they are a ramshackle piece of shit AI that just has a bunch of pre-play stuff and money, just like every other fan campaign in existence. And we're no better than that. So please don't expose us by wiping the whole map and then still being attacked by Nidus worms and other things that are spawning in, just like our co-op experience, because that would expose us for the frauds we are. Well, this is the No Frauds Club, ladies and gentlemen. We do things a little bit differently around here. We're not interested in making it so that you're discouraged through dialogue and a bunch of pre-play stuff from actually engaging with your opponents. In fact, engaging with your opponents as they engage with you is kind of the whole point of playing a game in the first place, especially a video game, especially a competitive video game, especially a real-time strategy game. Wow, who would have thunk it? You're building armies and harvesting resources and fighting against AI that are doing the same thing, while also having approximations of who those AI are as characters, talking to you and bantering with you and laughing at you when they kill your expansion, and maybe swearing at you when you kill their expansion. Wow, it's almost like there's really easy ways to immerse the player in the experience without even having that much dialogue, and certainly without having a bunch of gimmicks that only exist to distract you from the hollowness of the experience. Think about how much dialogue is in the average StarCraft 2 map, dude. Think about how many transmissions populate your ears and pull focus away from the gameplay you are currently engaging in. Oh yeah, there's a lot of them. And the reason being is entirely because nobody has any idea at Blizzard how to do anything without looking at a spreadsheet and figuring out how many resources worth of units they should pre-place in this area to achieve the desired playtime for their mission. It is a hollow experience. There is no replay value. There's no play value to begin with. It's literally just a bunch of static shit waiting to be A-moved. And, well, StarCraft 2 does A-moving pretty well with all of its pathfinding stupidity. But you know what? It's really not all it's sliced up to be, is it, homie? I don't even think you can scout and stir the pre-placed hives Night of the Realm. I don't even think that's possible. I think what happens is you try to scout around, your unit gets killed because it's a scout, and you're scouting probably with like a worker or a low-tier unit or something, and you're walking into like siege tanks and ridiculous numbers of pre-placed units, and then you're told to go fight Amon. Well, Amon is a void. And there's a void in the gameplay too. I don't know if you knew that. So there's your StarCraft 2 sucks clip. Anyway, going back to designing a good RTS, I do enjoy talking shit about StarCraft 2, but you know. There it is. There's the timestamp. So I think I am a bit concerned about how the production facilities might feel a touch overloaded for the Sycora. I wonder if maybe each production facility should just automatically have access to all of the units I intend to provide. And when you upgrade the structure, you get access to another set. And that's how we'll do it. Which means it could be kind of interesting to make the empath even more expensive than it, or the clerisy even more expensive than it is, but still be available at tier 1. Because that would allow you to access all 6 units that it has to offer. If I wanted to keep the Yin Yin and Tylar assigned to the clerisy. I think maybe I would split at least one of these, though. I'd probably keep the cap at like 5, at least for early tier production facilities. I feel like beyond that, you kind of get overloaded. It could be pretty interesting, though, because then you're actually making the decision to opt into really expensive structures because of the fact that they have 5 units available at the beginning of the game. And then, maybe the Tylar ends up being a tier 2 or tier 3 unit or something, and I can make it even more powerful as a result. But we could move the Anito to tier 1 for the Martyrium and then keep the Erodi as a reliquary unit. That could definitely work. I suppose the Yin and the Katoros both having the shield regen stuff and the Cortalis having its own shield regen kind of makes me think like maybe we should split these into 2 separate production. Oh yeah, and the Tylar is also a shield regen. Yeah, I think maybe these 2 units should actually both be tier 3 then. And then we can have the Katoros. We can have these 4 as a default. We can keep the Clerisy the same price that it currently is, and then maybe we can revise the Sinter a little bit to be less niche in nature. Though I suppose just by virtue of it being a fighter, an air unit, it might not be super niche. Not sure. I don't know about costing 250. Particularly since it's so weak, actually. Like 150 is more than enough of a resource cost at that point. So let's take the intrusion and we'll make a new building that we'll name later. This will be a tech center for tier 3. I guess if we wanted to have the production, so the mechanic where the production facilities upgrade themselves into new production facilities is, we could also take the same mechanism and apply it to the tech centers and make it so that the tech centers themselves upgrade into the next tier, which would save on build space. But it also has the downstream effect of putting all of your eggs into one basket, essentially. Whereas if you lose one, you lose access to everything. And because I think that works better as a mechanic when you can independently verify some elements of it. Whereas like when you can essentially insulate yourself against the really negative consequences of just getting owned. In fact, as a result of just thinking about this now, it probably doesn't ever make sense to bother with... Yeah, it probably doesn't make any sense at all to bother with that. It probably makes more sense to always have some distribution of potential, unless there's an easy way to scale back up the tech tree in terms of like maybe it's not very time costly. But I was thinking like evolving your tech facility doesn't actually work the same way, does it? Because it doesn't matter as much for Zerg if they lose like tier 3 because they can rebuild it in probably the time span of like a minute and a half or maybe 2 minutes, which is still a setback, sure, but it's not so massive. The other reason why it doesn't matter as much for them is that they have tech structures that unlock the units. So really, the tech centers themselves just unlock the structures that in turn unlock the units. Now, the Orlithray, which is the closest thing to Zerg in this setting, are going to have a completely different setup where instead of the tech structures unlocking units, they'll have a central nerve structure. It was originally planned to be similar to the Alazal Arbor and stuff, the Iral Iris and so on, where that unlocks production facilities, and the production facilities train the units. That's still a way to insulate yourself by just building a lot of the same production facility because the unit is trained from the production facility, so it's less of a problem, you could say. So yeah, I guess that would be the way to insulate yourself against a sudden tech demise. Because I always felt it was actually really dumb that you could just hive snipe somebody in for example, this happens a lot in StarCraft 2 Melee, or at least it did when I still watched it years and years ago, where people would like doom drop as Terran against Zerg, snipe the hive, and then win the game off of the fact that they wouldn't be able to rebuild any tech for a long time. Obviously, that, like I just said earlier, that is still technically feasible in Cosmonarchy Brood War, but you insulate yourself just by building the tech centers themselves in maybe a different spot than your central nervous system, like your nerve center. So you know how it is. You know how it be. I think for the Sycora, it's probably fine for them to have independent tech structures, tech centers. And then as they get progressively higher tier, they would become progressively more, not just expensive in terms of resources and time, but also in terms of build space. So I think that could make some sense. I kind of want to experiment with tech centers or structures in general that have really weird build space requirements. Like instead of being blocks, these guys might have like an eye shape where it's like a line here and then like a line in the middle or something, you know, like an eye, like a capital I. Something like that could be really cool, where like they just have really wacky build shapes. And then you could like fit in other structures in between them or whatever. What's up, Balethal? I'm not surprised that it became like that in StarCraft 2. If the layers and stuff actually conferred advantages beyond HP and tech security, maybe that would actually be useful or interesting gameplay. But in StarCraft 2, they don't. It's something that only I apparently had the audacity to attempt to implement. UED commander posting about Nazis again. Can't be having that, can we? Oh yeah, the fact that queens were trained not from larvae but from the central structure is such a weird gimmick. It was ridiculously lower off creep, even more so than the Hydralisk. It's just a stacked, like it's a massive confluence of gimmicks, like stacked on top of each other. If working within Brood War is stacked, diminishing returns, as Veek once put it, then even witnessing StarCraft 2 is stacked gimmicks, basically. Pretty ridiculous. I also think it's really funny that like Hydralisk wasn't a particularly creative name, but at least they came up with the lisk suffix. Roach is a pretty disgusting name for a Zerg unit. Like, imagine a Cerebrit saying, "You need to build more roaches, Cerebrit." Fucking dumb. I think the whole idea of like creep conferring an advantage is probably a lost cause. We tried to make it so that they gain the height range bonus when targeting units that are off creep, but it's hard to know that that's happening because there's no read for height for a range bonus like that, and it's also kind of like, I mean, I guess it might be fine in that context because you can like move on to creep to negate the advantage, but there's not really that many ways to create creep in a localized area. So like once we removed that Bactilisk passive because it just wasn't working correctly, which means there's not really that many opportunities where it can come into handy unless you're like defending, which I guess is okay, but like you probably already have terrain advantage if you're defending. Ah, what's up, Jocks? Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Balathal. I have plans to make it so that Burrow is the only way that Zerg will even get HP regeneration. I should say I had plans. I'm not going to bother doing that now. But basically, I was going to make it so that Zerg get like significantly, like basically the Roach HP regeneration while borrowed thing would apply to all units in Cosmonarchy Brood War for Zerg once they were borrowed. It obviously means that air units don't get the same benefit. I guess they could do like the Warcraft 3 Gargoyle Stone Form thing where they root to get it or something. But I had the idea basically to make it so that units that were borrowed would get a lot more HP regen. And maybe I could just offset this by increasing the HP, the base HP of air units or something like that, or rather than giving them any out of combat regen. But anyway, the point is that you'd be able to burrow your units in the middle of battle to heal them, which would add a little bit more oomph to having good micro, but also for your opponents to bring out detection against you. And it would also lead to more ambushes and stuff. Like you harass some units, you lose some, and you get others wounded, you pull them back and burrow somewhere and wait for them to heal. Stuff like that. Just here to dunk on Blizz. Hell yeah. Dude, you missed me dunking on StarCraft 2 earlier. That'll be a clip later, probably. There's supposed to be this unkillable unit that just gets one-tapped by immortals, so bye. I already have some lower ones in, like the Ensifi one is only 300, I think, 350. It's the same time cost, but, or no, is it? Let's find that out. It's actually 15 seconds cheaper as well. Okay, yeah, it is. That's not the case for all of them, but like the treasury is closer and also requires hypervials, and the safe house is still pretty pricey, but the idea is that you can drop it somewhere and not worry about it. So the Ember Seat one is even more less pricey because it's also a production facility. It's not just a town center. And then the Sycora one is a bit more expensive in terms of resources, but much less expensive in terms of build time because they build structures from their town center. So that's why. Ah, welcome, Sir Dick Kicker the First. You saw the clip about enemies, yeah. Apparently that has gotten some people riled up elsewhere in places where they won't actually communicate because they're worried about having their arguments dismantled live on stream. What do you mean Protoss get higher regen on units with higher HP pools? Is this StarCraft 2 has some sort of scaling for shields or something? Yeah, I would just make like passive regen or whatever, like the way it is works in Cosmonarchy now, where you have to be out of combat for 2 seconds before it kicks in. And then you just make it so that the regen itself is more noticeable. That way you're increasing the power budget but adding counterplay. That way it's not just some like weird, obscure passive thing that barely does anything. Yeah, they added it to the Mutalisk and then probably removed it a million times because that's what they do with everything. And I think it is still on the Reaper. The weird thing about the Reaper one is that they like removed so many abilities from that thing. Like they just really couldn't decide what they wanted out of it, basically. Which is pretty embarrassing. Yeah, I feel like that too, but isn't it such a like a it's such a blur because they just keep changing everything. Yeah. It's really funny. I mean, at some point it was just a weapon that they only used against buildings, and then they changed it to no, they changed it to a bounce that would repulse units in the air and bounce like they could use it to bounce themselves up like over walls and stuff. This is a psycho unit, dude. Yeah, I do recall you posting screenshots of balance changes for shit like the Widow Mine or Raven. Always fun. Always classic. Yeah, okay. I just can't believe like it went from an ability that you targeted buildings with, I think, to then a weapon that would only target buildings. I think they just removed it. Then they added the weapon version. Then they removed that and gave them the drugs passive that heals them. And then they added the displacement bomb thing. Yeah, it does like 5 damage. It's very negligible. That's like the opposite design philosophy that I have, though. If you're going to add something that barely does anything in one category, like basically something that has damage but only a little bit of it, and that's not even the main point of the ability, then why have the damage at all? Like, what is the point? Like, just double down on what the point of the behavior actually is. Wait, what is the point of the missile if it doesn't do damage? Yeah, that sounds about right, actually. Ah, decreased. Yes. So it only reduces armor. Reasonable. I can't look at that. Don't make me. Did they remove the documentation for everything else? What the fuck is this? That's insane. Oh, they have a separate page. Yeah, because the changes were too intense, probably. Oh yeah, I guess we should add the sequential thing. I think that's the prologue to Legacy of the Void. The epilogue one is the insane one that you go. It's called Into the Void, I think, because why not? Okay, that's fine. I think you're in the wrong corner of the internet to try to make the argument that any of the StarCraft 2 campaign missions were fun, homie. I can't remember if Mesk and I actually played, if Mesk watched my playthrough of the prologue or not. I can't remember if I made him sit through that or if we just ignored that one. The prologue was just, I'm pretty sure it was another set of 3 missions because 3. And it was also just junk. Very bizarre set pieces all over the place. Nova Covert Ops was 3 installments of 3 missions. 3. Yeah, pretty much. I love drinking water and then looking at the bottom of the cup and seeing a dead fucking fly. Thanks. They just suicide into my water cup all the time. Pieces of shit. Well, I am going to have to get more water pretty soon, but I wanted to add another unit. I guess I can finalize the changes I was talking about earlier. So we'll take the Yin Yin and the Tylar off of the Clerisy and move them to a tier 3 production facility for the Empath and tweak their stats as a result. The Anito will go to Martyrium tier 1. The Erodi will become a Reliquary unit. So we'll say this is tier 1, suborder 1, 2, 3. And then the closest thing you had to a non-gimmicked map, I think, was that space map in Wings of Liberty when you were. It was the It was the macro choice between that or going into the Nidus Canal map with a bunch of Terran heroes. The Nidus Worm map where you're in the caves. So there's a mission where you have to. At some point, they like randomly cutscene you in the middle of gameplay to show you the arrival of a behemoth. Is that what they're called? No, they're not called that. There's some unit that they're called a Leviathan. It's a really embarrassingly cringe name. And you have to kill it, and it's very ugly. So the Leviathan is obviously like a gimmick, and then the fact that you're destroying like a specific structure that then blows up in a cutscene all of the structures, all of the Zerg that are on a certain area. That's a gimmick, but so it's still not ungimmicked. But you are actually dealing with expanding. The AI doesn't expand or contest you because it's StarCraft 2, but at least you actually had to play some macro and build some units. It was still really poor, though. It was still like Babby's first RTS mission, basically. And yes, Nidus Canals were infinitely easier or infinitely more annoying to deal with in that mission. It's pretty embarrassing, though, because that mission is trivialized if you just happen to build only Marines instead of building like heavy hitters. Because Kerrigan has like armor reduction thing that reduces. It's like the old immortal passive, hardened shield thing, which is really funny that they removed, by the way. But yeah, so Kerrigan has like a hardened carapace thing that reduces impact of damage over certain thresholds. I think she can only take 10 or something. And then she also just instantly kills vehicles and spacecraft. So she'll just like one shot a battlecruiser with an ability arbitrarily. Stuff like that. So if you just annihilate her with Marines, yeah, she'll razor swarm you, but like she doesn't cast that all the time. It's on like a weird cooldown. So you just destroy her. Because you have like if you actually build as many Marines as you can in that mission, I think the supply cap is still 200 in StarCraft 2, but it doesn't really matter that much because like she only kills maybe 50 supply worth of units probably. So if you have like 100, then you just kill her and then keep like it's just a stupid defense mission anyway. So it's not even like you have to do something elsewhere on the map. So you can just keep your army entirely localized. It's difficult to describe anything as man mode in StarCraft 2, homie. But I know what you mean. All right, take off the intrusion requirement and go into intrusion and remove the Anido. And then we'll also have to remove Union and Tylar, but we can move those over to the Laybear. And then we can take the... we've done that for the Anido. The Orodi is going to be moved... well, it's here too, but it's going to be... created by the Reliquary. And we'll keep it at suborder 1 because I'm going to add some other units. Or a single other unit in the way. And then I guess for the Anido, I should probably take a look at its stats real quick to see if I need to change anything. I can't think of anything in particular that would need to be changed about this unit for it to be tier 1. It is pretty expensive. Suppose I could make it so that it's like 25 seconds instead of 20. And that would be like the only thing that I would probably want to change here. Considering it's now a tier 1 unit. That way it's slightly more expensive. Not that big of a deal. Okay, so with that being said, the Reliquary is now set up to train the Orodi. I suppose in the intrusion section I should remove the Orodi because it's no longer unlocked that way. Union and Tylar are going to be tier 2, so we'll take Tylar. Tier 3. Tier 3. Remove the requirement for the intrusion. Yeah, these aren't going to be unlocked by the tech structure anymore. And they're also not going to be unlocked by the Clerisy or trained by the Clerisy, so we'll remove that. And I guess we can just make these changes now. Oh yeah, and I have to go into the Clerisy and then remove the Union and Tylar. Tweak tech tree. Okay. So now those are down there. This is up here. Cool. Yeah, this is a race of extra-dimensional creatures that have modified their technology so they can exist in our reality. So they're meant to be quite trippy. Some of their later game stuff is going to be it promises to be very insane. For example, they're going to have stuff that like just inverts entire aspects of terrain. So basically, they can like. I'm thinking of an aura that inverts the terrain actually, which I don't know how we'll do programmatically speaking. Technically, implementing such a thing is going to be quite challenging. But I was thinking of a unit that would basically have this aura that, as it sort of walks through, it basically creates a path through whatever it's walking through. So if you're walking, if you walk this unit up against a cliff, the cliff will become pathable in the aura around the unit. And so you'll be able to use this unit to escort a bunch of units through like unpathable terrain, like over water or through cliffs and stuff like that. I don't know how easy that will be to implement, but that's an idea that I've had for a while. And originally it was going to actually be a Protoss unit way back. Decided to dig up that concept for something here. Again, no idea when that will make manifest, but it's an idea. And then they'll have stuff that like just removes blocks of terrain or moves an entire area to some other place. So in the super late game, they'll actually be able to relocate resource areas, like in giant zones of the map, just relocate it to some other place and swap the terrain entirely, which will lead to some very interesting things. I'm sure. I'm sure that won't be really annoying to implement. But I'm here to I am here to prank Veek with all my crazy concepts. I don't know what the unbidden are, but yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean the radius would probably be quite small, so you would probably want something like a couple of them to get a larger army over. Um, but yeah, I mean it'll be like the arbiter in if for Protoss has the recall behavior or the recall ability. There'll be something like that for the Sycora where they actually just switch positions. So it would be like taking a slice of the terrain around you with the recall, which obviously is going to also be quite interesting. So yeah, just really wacky concepts, basically. These guys are my like, what would you call it? Blank check to design some really interesting, wacky things. Oh, that sounds very well programmed, Chalks. Well, I'm going to take a quick break so that I can use the bathroom and refill my water so it doesn't have a fly in it. In the meantime, check this map out, this tech map out, and I'll be back. Bye bye. I have returned. I got the fan going. Hopefully it's not too noisy. What is this image? Oh, useful. So I'm guessing this is your example of deforming the pathfinding or whatever. I think mine would actually try to occlude the cliff layer entirely and reveal whatever the base terrain layer is below it. So you would actually, like, literally see the cliffs being, like, masked out by the ball. But, yeah. It would kind of look like that, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, we would basically just, you know, visually hide the area. I'm not even sure if we would need to do that. I think we would just mask out the terrain entirely, because this is actually meant to be this, like, reality bending effect anyway. So if it looked kind of fucked up as if it were being distorted, or like, I mean, this is just an example, but to sort of underscore the point, but I probably wouldn't go this route. It wouldn't be that out of place to just draw like a null tile or a pure white tile or something that looks like a back face maybe, or something that just looks wrong, like an error. It wouldn't actually be that out of place for the Sycora, because how else would your brain interpret the fourth dimension being woven into ours? Even though that sounds like gobbledygook, but you get the idea. So there will be some wacky things. Like, I'm trying to define or decide how I want to show visually, like, the errors themselves that are, like, the tile movements. Because there's going to be some units that just remove terrain. Like, they don't swap it with something else. They straight up just removed, like, a whole area. So figuring out how to show that that area has actually just been culled from the map is pretty interesting. And it can be rebuilt, obviously. Like, there's going to be the Thruck, for example, are a race of, like, composite materials, like, with some sort of sapience. And they'll be able to just, like, they'll be able to expand their shores, build cliffs, form their different workers and stuff into terrain features, create ramps on the spot, bridges and stuff. So, like, those guys will be able to seal up the holes if they want to. But still, you know, you get the idea. There'll be a bunch of cases where there's terrain interaction in a little bit more of a direct way. Actually, something I already planned in the tutorial. The third mission of the tutorial takes place in a very cluttered environment. And my thought process was, well, if I give the Ancifi, because the Ancifi have these really massive, like, armor platforms, like the Pavilion, where, if we go find it, it is a unit that has 40 transport space, weight capacity, can hold 40 weight worth of units on it. And that means you could put small production facilities on it. It could load those in. That means you could put just 40 dudes on it, right? And they're all, like, walking around and stuff, because you can, this unit can, it's a garrison, essentially, so units can shoot while they're inside it, but they can also be targeted because of the open roof, and the floor plan allows them to walk around in it. So it's basically like this moving piece of terrain that you can put structures in and units in and stuff. And the structures can train units while they're aboard it and stuff. Now, the weight cost of the Pavilion is 50, so it's 10 more than the weight capacity. I've thought of everything. Definitely don't want to have that happen. But the idea is that this is an enormous unit that can, like, carry around a small base and replenish units on the front lines. So because they have a technology like that, they don't actually really like tight corners and stuff, at least in the mid to late game when these types of units start coming out. They can operate in them with a lot of infantry, but they prefer to be able to have enough open fields to deploy some of their heavier weaponry. So naturally, there's going to be a way for them to just excavate cliffs and, like, you know, blow them up or something. There'll be some sort of terraforming unit that can level the playing field, so to speak, by removing cliffs from the equation. So I'm not 100% sure how that will work, but I would imagine they could literally start deconstructing them. So I think all Regencies will have some terrain interactivity. I just haven't decided what they will be and whether or not it'll be like super niche, or will it be like a behavior on a unit that you would train for other reasons as well. The natural fit seems to be the workers in many respects, but I'm not sure. Yeah, use gun. If that doesn't work, use more gun. They do like themselves some guns. The Madcap, for example, really likes his guns. This guy just shoots ridiculous amounts of ammo at people, so pretty good stuff, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure if the terrain transformation experiments will work out the way I want them to, but it's another layer, obviously. I think if you like, the concern that I could see levied at this is where the like people would say, oh, it's overpowered that you could just completely change the terrain. But I feel like if you invest enough time into changing the terrain to a huge drastic measure, you're probably not going to have the same amount of resources invested into vehicles and stuff. Or whatever the case may be, like whatever the other stuff that you could have invested that money and time into. So it's kind of like a micro trick in a way that can help you win a small battle, but probably won't be the main thing that helps you win in general. So I'm not sure. We'll have to vet the actual interactions and see, like, can I get a ridiculous amount of value, a disproportionate amount of value, I should say, out of a small investment? Like, can I just move 1 or 2 bits of the terrain and then have a huge advantage? I kind of doubt that would be the case, but you never know. I think anytime you would have terrain that is removed, like a cliff tile that's removed, it would probably make an unbuildable tile, which maybe then could additionally be cleared. I'm not sure, but either way, there's ways to tweak the values here and there and make it more or less useful, basically. Yeah, the weight system, Knight of the Realm is mentioning, like, it does feel way better than the fact that the UI stuff is always gobbled up. There will probably be like I don't know how we'll handle like accessing the cargo, but I feel like maybe that could just be a dedicated submenu where you like click a button on the command card to change the unit info pane to actually show the cargo, so that you could then like select some units or right-click on them to make them leave or whatever. Yeah. Well, that's why I said unbuildable as opposed to unwalkable. But yeah, I wouldn't want any extreme cases like that. Any sort of like massive result just from that sort of thing. Okay. So I'm thinking, as far as combat rolls go, we do have a way to get a nice fighter going. I wonder if maybe there could be like an obvious case where there would be a nice fighter concept would be if we provided like the obviously the Aurora passive, the last orders from Cosmonic Brood War Protoss, where this is like this light fighter craft that would suicide into a ground target, crash into a ground target when they were dying, when they were taking fatal damage, and then they could be additionally shot down again. I was never a massive fan of that, but I was never a massive fan of the way that like the HP reduces to 0 and then jumps back up, but I don't actually know how else you would show that. Because you could make it an HP breakpoint, like cutoff point, but then that also feels a little weird. I don't know. It's probably fine the way it is, but maybe there's a way to make it more intuitive. Hard to say in the current setup. So, let's talk about what we want in addition to the fighter. I feel like we could probably try to combine the Exodo and the Iata. Insofar as we could have a more durable basic infantry unit. And that could be like... That could actually be me playing around with the idea, by the way, because it's kind of neat to imagine like two units saying their successor is the same. I don't know how we would do that for the predecessor, though. Suppose I probably can't. I can ask Vik about this. Can I list more than one predecessor? Asking because I was playing around. Just typing to Vik about my thought process on this. The idea of one unit being the successor to two others where it combines the roles. Lardisms. Okay, so let's take that idea. We take the Exodo, come up with a new unit. The Ewinata. Probably stupid, to be honest, but we'll play around with it. Maybe the Ewina? We'll figure it out. That is a very different meaning coming from the Sycora. I think the reason why a lot of the units will probably sound a bit Asian is because Japanese has that trait where they do that thing where it's like a new, like every other letter is a consonant and every other letter is a vowel. So, like, you just don't get that kind of, like, if you think about What is that? Their like their language is written in a certain way. Katakana, I think, is like one of their languages or one of their alphabets or something. I don't remember. I'm not a weeb, so if that's not obvious. But yeah, katakana is like, is it you can it's KA, TA, KA, NA. So you get like the on off oscillating thing. We're doing the same kind of thing for the Sycora, so except we're starting with different things. So there's like linguistic rules or whatever. Oh, cool. I actually can apparently have 2 units as predecessor. So we'll say Exodo and you Hayata. Oh, okay, yeah. So basically like the KA and katakana is its own character and then the TA and so on. Sensible. I kind of like the idea for this to be a consistent element of the Sycoran tech tree, where you've got 2 units that whose combat roles are then sort of like they're kind of similar, but they serve different niches, and then that the unification of their combat role is exemplified by a specific unit of another tier, which then opens the door for more combat roles that can then do the kind of the same thing, if you know what I mean. So you get this sort of like nested tree of lineages instead of a straight linear lineage, where it's like this unit, then this unit, then this unit. In this case, it's like these 2 influence to make this one, and then that one combined with another one to make another one, and sort of like what Sir Dick Kicker was talking about, actually, when it's like a family tree instead of just a straightforward sequential lineage. I think that's kind of a neat way to have them do things. So, cool. Yeah, I'll probably try to see where I can do combinations like that in the future as well for this particular regency. So, in that sense, let's find ourselves an icon that we can use for this man. Suppose I can probably use the golem one. All right, so because we wanted to do Exodo and Ayata, we're thinking probably 6 range on their weapon, but stats-wise, we want something that fulfills these. I think I made it cost hypervials, right? Just a tiny bit. So let's actually bump the Magmite cost up, because we're going to be giving it a pretty reasonable amount of stats. And we did make the time cost 20. I think 20 is probably fine. That does make me want to bump the Magmite cost up a little bit further, but I'm not 100% sure yet. Should it be somewhere in the middle, or should it be a direct upgrade over that one? That's a question. We could probably do something like 30 HP, but only 70 shields. And then give it armor. I think the Ayata had 1 armor. Yep, so we can give this one 1 armor as well. Sight range 8 and 8. Just give it 9. Give it 2 weight. The speed is 3.5 on both of these. That can stay, actually. And we'll leave that there. So now we have to come up with the weapon real quick, so I will find the Exodo Blaster and add that here. Actually, I should probably do this. Just wait for it to load. So this is where I wanted to search for encapsu... Okay, no. I was actually thinking of encompassing, but it's already there. Okay. I was thinking of encapsulating, rather, but encompassing is there, and it kind of means the same thing, so... Whip myself up some more caffeine! Okay. Do I have a unified? I do not have a unified blaster. There you go. We came up with it. We did it, boys. So we wanted 6 range on the blaster, that's for sure. And then we wanted... Let's see, we had 0.5 on the Exodo and 0.8 on... I think we'll actually keep the 0.5 from the Exodo, but we will up the damage and make it so that it's... It'll be 1 times 8 with 2 armor pen, which is actually better than the Ayata damage-wise and more attack speed as well. So I think that's fair. That will do the trick. I do have to think about these stats very carefully because I'm still sort of like... I haven't been able to build an intuition about how powerful certain attacks actually are yet. But we'll get there. We will get there. And then, of course, we have a behavior for it, so... Now talk about power. So now we just need to go into the reliquary. And oh yeah, and then I actually wanted to go into the IATA. Where is it? I wanted to say successor Sycora U Emanata. You know what? Emanata actually grew on me. I'm surprised. I thought it was just going to sound cringe, but it's actually okay. Now this, boys, this is a unit. Check out that passive. Upon striking a target, Ewanatas are free to attack the marked victim from any range. The effect lasts for 5 seconds, but can be refreshed with a successful attack. I should say is refreshed by. I guess we could just say unless refreshed by a successful attack. Now that's epic. Okay, so we've done that. Made a unit, pretty cool. Let's go back here. Now that puts us in a situation where we are in a... yeah, it's a lock-on, dude. The projectile speed of the Sycora attacks are always pretty quick. Speed 30 is pretty quick compared to even like the default kinetic speed for bullets from like NCF guns, which are like the corollary to Terrans, you could say, is 20 by comparison. So this is 150% that value. Missiles, I think, are like around 14 or 12 or something like that. So you can kind of see where the power will really be all about, or what the power will really be all about. I really like the system, and I think I think that lock-on idea is really cool because it sounds really powerful, but then you think about it, you have to actually get within 6 range of a unit, which probably means that unit can just pursue you. Now, the cases where it is really, really tough are if you're trying to target a building. That's really... if you target a building, that's pretty fucking tough, right? But they still have to get there. And they're not going to get, like, teleportation behaviors and stuff that affect other units until maybe tier 4 or 5. So it's probably possible to grief this in a way, or to abuse this in a way, where you tag a structure and then teleport out and just start firing. But if you're too far away from the main target, your projectiles actually won't cross the map in the time that it takes. So there's a built-in sort of sanity check for the range, and I can make the seconds that it lasts less time as a balancing act for that. But yeah, you can imagine. You can imagine it's pretty powerful anyway. And it only works for the individual units that marked it, too. It's not like it works for all other units. So the specific Ewanata has to link to a target, has to lock on to a target with a successful hit. And I think they'll only be able to lock onto one target at a time, but I'm not sure. Which means if you intercept a different unit, if you like block it with some other unit maybe or something, I'm not sure. Maybe that would change the target, you know? So we'll think about that. But I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll want to read for the emanadas when they have locked on target, and also for the structure that's locked on, obviously, or the unit, the target that's locked on. That won't be too difficult though. We'll just make it so that like the color changes to some more intense, like Sycora units will be fairly colorful, so it shouldn't take too much time to implement such a thing. I'm pretty excited about that unit in particular. That's very nice. Very epic. So we want at least one more unit for the Reliquary. We probably want 2 more units for the Reliquary, if we're honest. With this new system that no longer allows for different... so what would you say? Like, originally I had the idea that like unlocking tier 2 would unlock units from the Martyrium. That just happened to be tier 2. In fact, it still says that it trains the Erodi, which is an error I have to fix. So we'll jump back down to the Martyrium and remove Erodi from the list. So, because of that, like, there's obviously a pretty considerable amount of, like, stability or consistency, I guess, now to the tech tree, but it also means that we have to be cautious about how the progression actually works. Because the Martyrium also makes the Reliquary, that you upgrade the individual production facilities. And then going from there to, like, I don't think there will be a tier 3 Martyr production facility. So basically, like, each branch will take turns not having a production facility. And right now, if we're looking at this pattern anyway, it looks like it'll be Martyr Empath at tier 1, Martyr Severed at tier 2, and then it'll probably be Empath Severed at tier 3, and we'll see what we want to do about, like, a pattern, or if we're just going to make it, like, not arbitrary, but, like, we'll have a justification for it. But I feel like with Martyrium and Reliquary, this is pretty well set up. I also think that the roster from the Clerisy is pretty well set up as well. I don't think we need a tier 2 production facility for them, because they've got a lot of utility from their units, and that's going to be a hallmark of their units in general. And then you come into here, and the Yin and the Tylar are really, really powerful, so... What's up, Shurath? Xibalba is the science fiction setting that I came up with, and Cosmonarchy is the game, that the RTS game, that is built in our own engine. It is not a mod. It started out as a Brood War mod, but we are now porting all of that stuff over to our own engine. Right now I'm working on the unit concepts for one of the Regencies, which is our name for the factions. I suppose I should actually take stock of the Ensifi one real quick, because I was still not 100% sure if I was going to have the original assessment of units. I think we're at like 42 units or something like that right now. That are currently planned. Yeah, eventually we're going to have 10 tiers of tech for each Regency, which means originally I thought that was going to be like 100 units. It might be a bit closer to 80. Still a pretty good amount, though. Like, supporting those long game times. Hell yeah, man. Thanks for popping in and saying hi. Oh. The Reliquary doesn't say that it creates that either. Noob. So we'll say... Oh, wait, this is missive. It should. Doesn't it? I think maybe it's just broken. Yeah, 10 tiers of tech. Oh yeah, there you go. I refreshed and it worked. Goofball. Oh yeah, that was like a really old instance, I guess. So the main reason why we want so many units is because we're targeting the ability to support a wide variety of game times. So the lengths of individual matches can go from, like, you know, maps that are smaller and have less expansions will probably end before anybody even reaches tier 5, maybe. And the idea there is that you're more talking about smaller scale skirmishes that probably resolve in about 20 or 30 minutes, and maybe even sooner than that. But there will be maps that are really massive that facilitate, you know, I don't know, like I think we're thinking right now of a cap of 64 players. We'll probably not even make there be an explicit cap necessarily. So there's going to be maps that are much longer, that take maybe 2 hours to resolve, or maybe longer than that. And if those maps exist, if those levels exist, we want players to actually be able to progress through the game and still be able to bring out new units, and change things up about their composition and explore different counters to their opponents. And part of that is just, you know, army movements and stuff. But another part of that is your tech tree. And that's actually how you express how powerful and skilled you are at the game in many respects is, you know, how on top of your economy are you? And the reward for being on top of your economy is being able to build more units or being able to build higher tiers of units. So that's the main thought process anyway, is that if you have 100 units, as an example, for each individual race, then that gives you the opportunity to use, potentially, all 100 units in a single game if it's long enough. And that way you're never really feeling like it's a grind or it's super boring and prolonged. You might be a little exhausted after a 2-hour game where you're actually playing an RTS the whole time. But the core idea is that you're able to progress for as long as the map allows you to. And, you know, assuming you have enough bases to support the economy necessary to train, you know, tier 10 units that are going to cost thousands of resources and stuff. So it also helps encapsulate the scale, I think. And there'll be a nice little, there'll be some ways to play around with those tiers of tech. Like in the tutorial, one of the plans for the second mission of the Ensifi tutorial is to basically have the battle take place on a memorial, which is in and of itself like a graveyard of a fleet, where there's like this massive battle that took place when the Ensifi first took the area that they're in, and one of their generals died in the battle, so they left a memorial for him out of his flagship and all the units that were in his retinue that were destroyed, and all of the Keltar, which is another regency. They were the opponents, really. There was a 1v1, you could say, between Ensifi and Keltar. Those guys also have their units in there, so there's representation from both battlefields, basically both the enemies and the allies and stuff. And as part of that, like, basically the idea was that it was meant to be kept pristine and safe and not be trespassed on. But as some outlaws will do, they decide to trespass on it to go scrap some stuff or whatever. You've got to go in and keep the peace, so to speak. And so part of that will be giving the player the access to reclaim damaged or derelict spacecraft and vehicles from higher tiers of tech, or maybe even buildings from higher tiers of tech, and do so and get access to those things without actually necessarily having to go through the whole tech tree. So you get a nice little preview of what it might be like to use a pavilion without needing to get up to tier 6. And stuff like that will be a pretty commonplace thing. Well, maybe not pretty commonplace, but it'll be there enough, especially from the tutorial, that you'll be aware of that kind of thing. So this is just different things that you can reclaim assets for and stuff. Yeah, basically, that's the idea. There's actually a sort of conspiracy going on between the outlaws and some other faction there, but on its face, it's really just meant to be about, like, you theoretically, you think you're just walking up there and trying to, you know, put some criminals to justice, or bring them to justice. There will be 20 regencies. When we first ship the game, there will be 6, and then more will be added in expansion packs, where we're planning on adding 2 per expansion pack, which would give us a total of 7, since 7 times 2 is 14, which rounds out the number to 20. So you're thinking about probably about 2,000 unique units for the regencies. And then we're thinking about maybe 40 structures probably. So I don't know, what is 40 times 20? I can't do math. I guess I could do 50 times 20 and subtract. No, I can't, because I can't do math. I'll just do it in my calculator. 800. Wait, no, that doesn't make any sense. Wait, does it? Oh yeah, I guess it does. So yeah, we're averaging somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 units, I would imagine. That's like the rough estimate for the whole game. But that'll take a lot of time, obviously. Ha! That's where you're wrong, homie, because we're actually designing the game to be performant. I mean, we want to have like thousands of units. I told Veek, my goal, Veek is the guy who's running most of the engine development. And I told Veek, like, listen, my man, I want 500,000 units on the field without lag. And he said, fuck you, but I'm going to try. So that's the answer. Fuck me, but we're going to try. And if we can do that, that would be pretty amazing. So, don't fret about your computer or about performance. We're very focused on that, actually. So I know I want a tier 3 severed structure and empath structure. We also want maybe 2 more martyr units for the reliquary, and maybe 1 more severed unit for the schism. So let's bang out the production facilities and then get back to units, and then we'll probably call it a stream. Well, people do like to flex. I mean, that's what the whole Crisis was all about, right? Crisis, the FPS game, where they just had a tessellated ocean beneath the playable space. Well, that's the attitude, homie. Crisis was actually really funny to me because it was basically people saying, like, it was developers actively engaging and making their products deliberately less performant because people wanted to flex. So I guess you're right, Baleful. That attitude does exist out there somewhere. What's up, Shamble Man? Welcome, homie. Oh, actually, I lied earlier when I said that the Sycora don't actually have a hover unit. The Akoron is a hover unit. I thought it was a fighter, like a light air unit or something. I was trying to think about a formula that would make sense for turret slots. I think I talked about this in my previous stream, actually. Or maybe I did. I can't remember if I don't think so. Maybe I didn't. Because I was working on the perch pistol concept, which I'm not sure if I've even mentioned. I think I must have, though. Anyway, the idea is that there would be... basically, there's the idea of turret slots, and certain units can attach and become turrets with other units. And this will be a mechanic that's pervasive throughout the game, but it's kind of specialized with specific branches and regencies. So it's not like every regency will have turrets that can be like hot swapped and stuff. I think every regency will probably have turrets, but they won't all behave like this one does, where you can deliberately like change them all or add them to another unit. But the thinking that I was trying to come up with was like, what would a turret slot actually look like, and what would the formula be for that? I think maybe it'll just be an explicit stat, but the way that we decide how many turret slots we have is probably the floor. It's like dividing the weight of the unit by 2 and then rounding down. And so if you're weight 1 unit, like you only occupy 1 transport weight, you don't have any turret slots. You must be at least 2 or 3. So basically 2 or 3 weight is 1 turret slot, 4 and 5 is 2, and so on and so forth. and that would probably be how we scale it. That does open up some potential abuse cases because I've tended towards making air units weigh more. So they have like maybe even a light fighter might have 4 weight or something, which probably just means they would be 3 weight instead if I only wanted them to have 1 turret slot as an example. So it is going to take some, because it's an explicit stat, theoretically I could breach from the formula, but I would kind of want it to be somewhat intuitive where you would know instinctively, reflexively. Every unit that you've looked at that has had 2 or 3 weight has always had 1 turret slot, so I don't even have to think about it if I see that they have like a certain weight cost. The base game is going to cost, currently we're thinking about $30 for the retail full price. This would give us, obviously Steam would take 10% of that, right? Or no, is it 15%? Or no, Steam takes 30%. Sorry, my mistake. So Steam would take 30% of 30, which I actually forget what I did all this math earlier, but it's like 30 times 0.3. So yeah, they would take, obviously, 30% is like, that would leave us with $21 per sale, assuming full price, which is probably unlikely anyway. Like, I don't know if we'll launch at a 10% discount or whatever, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, the main idea is that when the game comes out, you'll have there'll be a campaign for each regency that is in the retail. So if you're thinking of only from the perspective of single player, you'll get access to, there'll be the tutorials, the 6 retail campaigns, because there's 6 regencies in the retail game. And then there'll be skirmishes and cooperative maps that you can play either by yourself with AI allies or with other players cooperatively. That will probably be something like, with each campaign being about like somewhere between 6 and 10 hours as a rough like blanket estimate, even if we just round down and say 6, which I think is unlikely. I think it'll almost always take longer than that. We take like 6 times, obviously 6 is 36, but then you add in the hours from the, I think it'll probably take like maybe, we'll say 3, because 3. We'll say 3 hours for the tutorials, just as like a rough estimate. That's 39 hours of content just from single player. You add in the co-op content, you're already getting more than 1 hour of content per dollar, is my estimation. And then there's obviously multiplayer. You can play competitively against other people. You can play just against your friends. You can obviously play skirmishes against AI. You can play some combination thereof, where you're playing like teams of players against teams of AI, stuff like that. You'll get access to the editor, obviously, so you'll be able to make your own stuff if that suits you. You'll be able to play scenarios made by other people. So theoretically, the actual hypothetical amount of content that you can have and the amount of man hours you can have putting into the game is infinite. Or the content, the hours you can get out of the game, right, of actual experience. So, but I don't want to sell people on a hypothetical infinite, because really it depends on like what they're actually after. Are they after a single player experience? Okay, you get probably 40 hours of content. Are you after a multiplayer experience? Well, if you don't bother playing with any of the single-player content, the multiplayer stuff is theoretically infinite. It's just however many you want to engage with. But you do get 6 regencies. Maybe it takes, I don't know, 10 hours minimum to get somewhat competent with a regency. So that's 60 hours of content, assuming that is a rough estimate. That holds true. So you can kind of like slice it any way you want. You're going to get a lot of hours of playtime worth from the dollar, right? So that's mainly the idea. When we have expansion packs come out, those are priced at $5 currently in our theoretical model. And they also become free when the next expansion pack comes out, because I don't want like a million DLC on the game. So in a hypothetical world where we've released expansion pack 1 and you haven't bothered to buy it yet, and then expansion pack 2 comes out, everybody will get expansion pack 1 for free, and expansion pack 2 will then be there as a premium purchase if you want to have it for immediately, instead of waiting for us to release the next one. The other thing is, if we're ever in a situation where the multiplayer gets access to the races that were added in the expansion pack, that those races will be free. The campaigns will still be premium, and any cooperative content or whatever that revolved around them or whatever, any like content that isn't related to the multiplayer, that will be locked behind. But when the expansion pack comes out, you'll actually be able to play as the new regencies in like skirmish or in multiplayer. Because the whole idea is that we're not going to like gate what you can do in competitive ladder or whatever based on DLC. Really, the only reason why we're having that there at all is because we assume it's going to take more budget and time and stuff to develop these in perpetuity. The other line that I had in the, there's like a whole, I've written out a whole documentation about our pricing model and our thought process on it. And we talk about how, like, I feel like consumers are regularly just robbed, basically, and never get their money's worth, and how I want to change that. And so we talk about this, 30 USD. I'm not 100% sure about... originally, the idea was when you pay $30, you actually get access to the RTS game and the other games we're going to make in Xibalba. I don't know if I still agree with that, because that is talking about getting 3 games for $30, and all of them being super retail. But at the same time, the games are different genres, so it's not like you're getting another RTS game for free. So the odds of you playing the game, or like explicitly buying the game, if you aren't necessarily interested in that genre, are kind of low. And so I still kind of side with the idea of doing this, even though like everybody would say, this is ridiculous. Why are you giving me 3 games for $30? Or basically, if I already played and owned Cosmonarchy, if I bought Cosmonarchy, I would get access to the twin stick action game and the FPS when they come out for free. That's the basic idea. So I actually think that's probably fine, because there's going to be people who are not interested in the RTS, but are interested in the roguelike sort of like twin stick action game, and or are interested in the first person shooter game. They're just going to come in and say, okay, yeah, I actually like that. I'll buy this game. And then maybe there's some cross pollination because they also get an RTS for free. Well, that can only improve like the sort of playtime, so to speak. So basically, instead of purchasing Cosmonarchy directly, you would be purchasing Xibalba, and it's just that we would launch as Cosmonarchy, if that makes any sense. But yeah, the DLC stuff, there's another note here that says, if it becomes clear that we do not require a significant spike in revenue to continue development over a year's time, the next expansion pack will be free. If we don't need the money, we won't take it. We're here to make games full time, and if that is achievable without charging our customers for additional content, we will take that opportunity to release expansion packs free of charge. So there you go. That's the basic, the main thrust. There's more stuff here if you wanted to read it, but there you go. Yeah, sort of Shambler, but the other idea is that, like, we don't, like, I don't need to go out and, like, buy some fancy shit or anything. I just need to be able to, like, pay the bills, keep the roof over my head, keep the internet on, phone on, all that stuff, like the necessities. And once I do that for long enough, well, obviously at that point, like, I'm going to have to at some point go back to work, probably, like, next month, just because, like, the unemployment benefits have ended and stuff like that, right? So I am going to have to go back to work, and I've already sort of accepted that. But in a world where maybe I didn't have to do that, and I could just keep doing this, like, this is my work, and I somehow am able to pay the bills, then that's actually what I want. I want to be able to just do this all the time. But I don't actually think it will take that much money. I was doing the math, and I think I came it out to... So, again, if we get $21 of profit, if you divide that by 3, it's $7 as a take. I'm assuming my take will be 30% of the profits. So for the sake of argument, we'll say I get $7 for every time somebody purchases the product. And then we take my monthly expenses, which is like, even to be generous, and call it $1,500. I don't even think it's that right now, because thankfully I lived in a situation where I don't have to spend that much money on myself. At $1,500 being my monthly expenses, if you divide that by 7, you get about 214 copies. We'll round up and say 215. That means I have to sell 215 copies to live very comfortably for my standards. So not just like pay the bills, but also just in general, like be able to maybe order out a few times a week or a month, I guess. Buy some extra shit that I wouldn't normally buy, whatever the case may be. Slightly improve my quality of life and continue to do this all the time. That's per month, obviously. So if we extrapolate that out to 12 months, so a whole year, that would mean I need to sell about 2,600 copies for 1 year's of development costs for me specifically to be taken care of. Everybody else on the dev team, I don't think needs nearly as much money as I do, but that doesn't mean I'm going to like lower their take. Obviously, like we'll agree on a pre-agreed upon number before any of this shit actually hits the fan and we actually start getting money in the first place. But what I'm getting at here is selling 2,500 copies might sound intimidating to some people. When you have content the way that we have content, when you have the ability to play cooperative scenarios, make your own stuff, do all of this other stuff, I think word of mouth will spread. We don't have microtransactions. We don't have DLC. We don't have, DLC, if we can avoid it, we won't be charging you for it. And even if we do charge you for it, it's $5. And it eventually becomes free anyway. Like, the point of the matter is, I don't think it'll be that difficult to spread the word for at least securing another year's worth of sales. Now, it seems like a very achievable number to me. Yeah, that is also something I have not factored in. You're right, Shamble. And again, this also doesn't factor in the change in cost if it's like on sale by 10% or 15% or whatever. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll be in for a rude awakening when the first couple bits of revenue come in. Not sure, but you know, we'll see where it goes from when we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, kind of deal. You know. And to answer your question, Shambler, yes, the Sycora are the extra dimensional guys that remove terrain and stuff. And do all sorts of crazy warping stuff. I was in the middle of designing a severed unit. Oops. What's up, Patrick? Welcome. Well, I think in an absolute vacuum, Shambler, $60 is probably a bargain for the amount of content you're getting out of Cosmonarchy alone. But that doesn't mean I feel like it would be a tough ask. It would be a tough task to try and convince people that that is the case, basically. So I'm not going to bother doing that. Yeah, I mean the financial side is stuff I haven't dealt with at all. But like I haven't. I've thought about it in terms of like what I already know, what my expertise already tells me. But I don't know that much about the inner workings of the system, to say the least. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see on that one, I think. What's up, Jankovic? I live in Massachusetts. I'm pretty sure it's somewhat high in taxes, but again, I haven't looked into it very much. On Steam, you lose 30%. That's the cut that Valve takes. So if we were assuming Steam sales, the numbers that I was just sort of throwing around about 2,500, 2,600 sales would cover. I'm assuming. So we would get $21 out of it. I'm assuming I would take 30% personally, and that would be my salary. And I would then get in order to pay the bills of about 1,500 monthly expenses, which is pretty low in my state actually. If I had to earn $1,500 per month, then selling 2,600 copies of the game per year at full price, assuming no taxes, would cover it. I don't know what the taxes would be because I would basically get $7 per sale at full price. Yeah, we obviously we'll be our own publisher, so Steam is essentially the central publisher in that sense. Yeah, they just start taking your money. Yeah, Jankovic, Balethal was just suggesting that maybe I would have to incorporate the No Frauds Club as a actual company in order to avoid or reduce taxes or something. I don't actually know how any of that works. I wouldn't want to do some weird shit where I like open a company in Panama or where's the offshore banking or whatever that everybody does. I wouldn't want to do that, even though I don't really agree with like the whole taxation thing. I'm not gonna do the same shit Blizzard does to have like offshore tax havens and stuff. That doesn't really make any sense to me. I'll just have to win by actually being able to convince people to buy the product. That's what I'll have to do. Right, Sir Dick Kicker. That's actually something we were planning on doing. So we were planning on actually launching from the website and from Steam at the same time, and then just offering the game at a cheaper price on our website. So you would actually just pay, maybe it would be 25 instead of 30 or whatever. I go into detail about this a little bit more in the Medic page I was just looking at earlier when I was talking about the pricing to begin with. I do value what Steam does and what Epic Games Store would do or whatever, insofar as they handle like algorithmically marketing our game. And if we can do the right inputs, we can get the right outputs of like our game being shown to theoretically millions of potential customers and get a lot of impressions based on that. I don't want to do a lot of dirty marketing work. In my mind, it is dirty. I don't really like doing it. I'll like to, provide some stuff that people can get hyped about genuinely, but I don't want to like engage in a bunch of really weird practices. So I would instead prefer to basically have like links to our site where you can find, basically I would want everything to link back to our website and then also have a Steam page link somewhere else. But first, when you, like in the YouTube description for the trailer, you see, purchase from our website or wish list on Steam, whatever the case may be. Like sign up on our website and stuff like that. And if you sign up on the website, there'd be some incentives. I'm not sure what they would be, but one of them would basically be like, if you sign up on our website, you've already created your Frauds Club account, which means then you don't have to go through the process of doing that when you want to play multiplayer in the Steam edition. Whereas if you don't do that beforehand, you are going to have to do that, which is not really that long of a step. But if you do it initially, and we get all of these account registrations, that's almost like even higher quality metric than wishlisting for people who are invested. Like they went through the opportunity to not just click a button that says add to wishlist. They went through the trouble of actually setting up an account for you intent to use later. And maybe we have like our own forum and stuff where people can start a conversation and get invested in that sense. So there would be like a community we try to build up and a bunch of other things like that. And the main idea would be when you have a Frauds Club website, that links to the forum account. It also links to your account to like having purchased the game in the first place, as well as whatever DLC that or expansion packs, right, that you have access to and stuff like that, and allows you to like, your match history and whatever the hell else. So yeah, the core idea anyway is you would have access to all this stuff. You would basically provide like whatever account details you normally provide for stuff, and then eventually you're going to get into a situation where like, if you've purchased through the No Frauds Club, then you just launch through our proprietary launcher and you have access to the game. If you purchase through Steam, you launch Steam, which then launches our launcher, which is kind of annoying. I know. I don't really like the whole idea of like, you launch Steam and then you launch another launcher. But I think people it's normalized enough now, and our stuff is going to be way more performant than fucking Uplay or whatever, so it'll just be infinitely better. It'll actually be much faster for you to get in a game if you don't have to go through Steam, believe it or not. But I understand why people like the Steam thing, because that's where their friends lists are. So you'd probably still want to add it to your Steam overlay if you play using Steam normally. And then theoretically, hopefully, the invitation system would still work, but I don't know how any of that's going to work. Yeah, Shambler, that's pretty insane. Right, Shambler, yeah. I mean, I'm not super worried about the whole tax thing. I think it's just something that we'll figure out over time. But. Right, yeah, okay, fair enough. In that case, I would need to sell an order of magnitude more, but I feel like if we have a well-planned press offensive, if we've done our initial setup work to get a lot of wish lists on Steam, for example, and then we get enough conversions from people who are like hyped to buy it, from like forum posting or the Discord server or whatever. From everything that I've researched, it seems like the easiest way to get a jump on Steam is to jump into their algorithm with, as soon as your game launches, have like 100 people buy it. And if you can get something like that, which is very reasonable, by the way, like it's very achievable, jumping straight into that would basically be like, I think there's more than 100 people in the Discord server now. If we can get 100 active users who all want to buy the game, who all buy the, and at least, a good portion of them buy the game through Steam, like, the job's kind of done there. It's spread out to the normies who don't know anything about it. And then ideally we would also have like some videos of people playing through some of the content that's already finished, but the game isn't launched yet. And that drives more wish lists, which then drives more people who pick it up without being necessarily mainstays in the space, right? They might not be in the Discord server or the forum, but they've wishlisted it, and then there's a conversion rate based on that. Yeah, Chalk's spamming it around indeed. I don't think there is a game that's pretty close to Cosmonarchy or what it will be. Like, even the Brood War mod that we started with is not really the same. It's not really comparable. Yeah, California is worse than New York City, but New York City's real estate is pretty insane too. If anybody watches Louis Rossman on YouTube, they already know. Actually, he's on Odyssey. Watch him on Odyssey instead. Yeah, he goes through New York City a lot and points out all of the insane things. What? I clicked on something, didn't I? Ah! I posted that unit concept for the Oenada, and Luciferius's reaction is just, what the fuck? Which is a pretty good reaction. What's up, James? All right, check out my man. Not sure if 45-degree angle is enough, but should be interesting. Maybe it'll have to be like 60. I don't want it to be 90 because that's, I think, too far, but going halfway in between might not be the worst thing in the world. Wait, what even would be halfway in between 45 and 90? Because you have to divide 45 by 2, right? Aha. Yeah, that's reasonable to read as a stat. I don't think so. Haven't you heard Balethal? He lives inside his father, actually. That's why we can hear his father all the time. I still can't believe when I first heard that guy, I thought he was your brother because he sounds very young. What the fuck? Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea, Chucks. I'll even write that one down in my idea pad. Because that Sycora interact with projectiles a lot anyway. They don't currently, but there is an idea there, so we'll say Chalk's idea. So it's basically split incoming projectiles to making armor more effective. It could actually be splitting outgoing projectiles instead, where they split them into two. That way, increasing the net damage is actually still a buff, but only situationally against like using projectiles that are high in armor pen or against enemies that are low in armor, basically, which is kind of neat. Dimension Men. I think the Phalanx is a pretty neat unit. I do wish it was less gimmicked in terms of how it was implemented technically, because it is a disaster in that respect. But, yeah. They're epic, I guess. They're definitely like a mainstay of the Terran race. Everybody knows all about them. But yeah, we'll think about how we'll actually use that. But I did want to write that idea down because it fits right in with like what the Sycora are already planned to do, which I don't know if you actually knew, but if not, that's even more synergistic. Simulant Men. So I need a tier 3 schism, well, a schism upgrade and a clerisy upgrade, both for tier 3. So empath and severed production, basically. Oh yeah, Balethal? Which ones did you read up on, and what you think? I actually can't wait for Kian and some of the other people who I usually talk to about Regencies to read up on some of the stuff here, because I just keep adding stuff. I haven't actually touched the Regency pages in a while, actually. But there are enough changes that some people haven't caught up on yet that I'm interested to see what they to hear what they think. Like I think last week, Veek finally read up on the Dalventhos and the Omindris and the Avot, and he was because he hadn't read those three, and those are the last three that I added, and he was like, "What the fuck? This is crazy." The closest thing to Zerg are probably the Orlithrae. They are inspired by Zerg in some ways, but they are meant to be. There's enough unique aspects to them that they won't just feel like another Zerg clone, specifically with how they play as well. They're also basically made up of a composite of multiple organisms. So all of their units are like symbiotes, basically. Two organisms living in symbiosis, or at least two, I should say. So they do have this sort of like hive mind consensus thing going on, but it's instead of just one hive mind, it's like each hive mind leads its own giant swarm, basically. Yeah, neither of them. And as far as necromorphs go, I don't think so. I see the thing about necromorphs makes me think about like really horrific organic things. Orlithrae have some aspect of that. Gedamemter has some aspect of that because it's an organic consciousness, like a super intelligence. And then there's but it's not really horrific in the same way. I guess Rune kind of are horrific in body horror senses. They rearrange like their body to like form new weapons and stuff. They've got very good explicit control of like their entire musculature, so they could like remove their right arm to make their left arm twice as long and then slap you with it. There will actually be like a lot of the melee attackers are gonna have like 3 or 4 range and stuff because they just like they basically just do this like lunging strike where like they become quite small to extend the length of their arm and like stab you or something because they might have like a blade on the end of it or whatever. So stuff like that, like they're actually really wacky. Yeah, the Rosellium are much more like a runaway experiment, like the paperclip machine thought experiment, but applied in the context of this. I don't think the paperclip machine is very likely for humans, but if you think about an ever-expansive universe, it really only takes one race to fuck up and engineer that for it to happen. So I just sort of played the odds on that one and said the Rosellium exists because of that. So basically the process of assimilating targets, it doesn't have to be like they don't have to be sapient or sentient or whatever, which is one of the key things why it's like so threatening, because Gedamemter spreads its influence by using organics, like its own organic material, if you will, to spread onto the target. So that's where like some of the body horror stuff could come into play, or the organic horror aspect of it. Like even vehicles that are in the service of Gedamemter are like they have organic shit on them basically, because they're being, or maybe not within them, but or like it would either be within or on top of, like on the outside or whatever. Yeah, exactly, both of them. The origin of the Rosellium is, I don't think it really matters that much because of the fact that the Rosellium, like, the species that made them are long dead. I mean, maybe it could be interesting as, like, a setting to find some, like, relic from the civilization that made them. But I have a feeling that, like, they might not have even been spacefaring or, like, massively spacefaring. So they might not have actually spread their influence very far. And as a result, they were probably among the first things to be recycled into more Rosellium, including the home star, the home planet, the home solar system. Like, the whole thing is probably gone now. So I think just by virtue of the nature of the Rosellium, you probably can't actually explore that unless you do some weird time travel stuff, which, I don't know, maybe. I can't rule anything out, I guess. But yeah, it would be interesting to explore that stuff. Basically, Gedamemter just wants to preserve as many unique aspects of reality as possible. Kind of like an archivist, if you will. Doesn't really care about how useful it is. Only cares about, like, is it unique, therefore I want to, like, safeguard it. And it's also kind of like, it's not really explained as to why he's like that. Or it, I should say, is like that. It's not really a gendered unit or thing. Yeah, basically Shambler. That's basically what it is. Yeah, you'd probably see Rosellium create these giant machine worlds that just, like, gobble up other planets or whatever. Not familiar with Trazen the Infinite? Yeah, but, well, Beothal, if you imagine, like, the things that would be necessary to gobble up a star, it doesn't have to be this enormous stellar construct or, like, planetary body or whatever, but it probably should, like, that would be one way to do it, is basically, like, sink this thing into into that. This is something I'm not sure if or how I would even try to work this in, but when I think about, like, I basically, this is going to sound really fucking pretentious. I go into these sort of, like, meditative spaces, headspaces sometimes, where I'll try to think about, like, I'll put some music on or I'll put some ambience on, and I'll try to think about, like, where the regencies, like, what some, not really story element, but, like, symbology that speaks to me, that ties in with some aspect of the setting I'm creating. And this isn't something I've done massively, like in terms of I don't have a history of doing this necessarily, but I started doing this with regards to the Xibalba. And one of the things that repeatedly comes back to me in terms of like a thought process that I keep having is like, again, it's hard to articulate without sounding weird, but basically it's like a hand, an immense, it has to be immense, a hand reaching out and just gripping an entire star and like snuffing it out. And I think that really that keeps stemming from me thinking about the Solar Throne specifically, which is obviously a funny thing if they're like destroying stars, obviously, because they're called the Solar Throne. But the whole idea that even their name is like an inversion on what the Githrovan actually want. Just having the word solar in their name is kind of an affront to the Githrovan in that sense, and that's deliberate. But I really like the idea of this. Like I don't like the idea of the immense Gundam type thing that's like capable of doing that. But just the visual of like a hand snuffing out an entire star and like sort of gripping it and imploding it or whatever. It doesn't really make sense in sci-fi, but that visual to me is very compelling, and I might be able to work that in as like some sort of psychic torture to break a Githrovan by virtue of like, you know, literally destroying their lifeblood, their life essence, and doing so in such a dominant fashion. Okay, that's pretty funny, Shambler. I could actually see Gadamemter having some sort of stasis museum, I suppose. It wouldn't be a technological thing, though. It would probably be some wacky organic thing, where he's somehow like mummified or whatever. The aspects of the, like whatever things he finds unique. So he would take great interest if there was like a fuck off upstart, you know, like some upstart that's just like about to get annihilated. If Gadamemter was aware of this, he would be like sending out his emissaries, you know. Probably a couple more units I can come up with here before the end of the stream. Yeah, the Solar Throne is a tough one to come up with like logical explanations for, because they're basically like they're not really a species because they're constructs, but they're like a regency created entirely out of malice, or like that exist to be somewhat malicious in some way. And so their motivations are colored through that. Whereas a normal machine race would be like the Rosellium, and they wouldn't bother with organics. They would see them as inefficient. But the Solar Throne don't want efficiency. They just want to crush and dominate their opponents from a psychological standpoint as well as a physical one. And if that means literally turning them against each other and like taking command of and in some ways even like not even full frontal ways, but some ways like subtle ways, like, you know, forcing worship upon a commander or something, you know what I mean? That would be something that I think would be pretty befitting of what the Solar Throne are all about. It does make I imagine some people who really like hard sci-fi or whatever would probably take issue with that, because like it expressly does involve some sort of like emotion, or maybe not emotion, but not a strictly militaristic goal or motivation. But I mean, that's what you get when you fuck up with your engineering, man. I don't know what to say there. Well, I think the way that psychic stuff will work inside Xibalba is just that it's tapping into some frequency. Like it's basically like biochemistry or biotechnology, you could say. Which means that there would be a possibility for mechanical aspects to also tap into that. Yeah, I mean the Solar Throne are actually just straight up malevolent, essentially. They're actually more like, if you want to say evil as a term, the Solar Throne probably are the most evil. And there's not really too many that are like straight up evil. Because generally I find that to be kind of boring. But the reason why I think the Solar Throne are an interesting exception is because they were literally engineered by somebody else, like another regency that you can play as. It's not like the Rosellium where their creators are long dead. The Githrovan like deal with their mistake every single day, basically. And while some others may act malevolent, there's also going to be some parts of them that are acting more in line with self-interest as opposed to malevolence. Like, I mean, even all of the malevolence will probably be perceived as self-interest by the person who's acting malevolently, according to the other people. You know what I mean? Like, I guess you could say that the Makrodots are sort of malevolent because they have that whole slave thing going on. But at the same time, the Dacier would never have the same amount of impact as just a lower hominid species. They are elevated in terms of how important they are in the grand scheme of the cosmos by Makrolon influence. So they're getting something out of the partnership. It's just that they are doing a lot of the grunt work, and they are also dying en masse compared to Makrolons. But at the same time, you think about that, like, basically what I'm getting at is there's nuance and there's ways to interpret pretty much every regency as not evil, besides the Solar Throne. And the Solar Throne themselves are like, I think even the way that they are evil is kind of interesting, basically. It doesn't feel like they're just some big bad that wants to destroy people because. Like, even their motivation to be evil is kind of grounded within the setting of, like, they were created by Githrovans. And then the Githrovans were, like, super afraid of them and fucked off and said, like, nah, these guys are, like, we revile these creatures, these creations and stuff. Like, at that point, I'm not saying you should sympathize with the Solar Throne necessarily, mind you, but you can probably at least understand like the chain of events that led to where they are, what they are now. Like from some points of view, the Sycora in literally invading another reality for resources so they can use it back at their own reality where they're under attack by other creatures. That's an example of stuff that like people could very easily say, oh, I sympathize with them because their civilization in their own reality is under attack. And they suffer while they're in this reality because it's not made for them. But then you could also say, oh, these guys are assholes. These imperialist, colonialist assholes coming into our reality and trying to colonize it. So you can take many different points of view, basically. Kolopoazos are kind of malevolent, but only in a sense that their motivation is just they want some fun. That's the main thing anyway behind them. So, Yeah, that's another aspect that you could also take for Shambler. It's another aspect of why I think it's interesting because it's not like I think evil just being evil to be evil is tautologist to the point of not really being that interesting. But since they just want to rid the galaxy of specifically their creators, but just in general, anybody that's going to stand in their way. And also because their creators, the Githrovans, are like widely respected by a lot of the other regencies. Like, they might not get allies in wartime, but they're sympathizers. Like, the Solar Throne's probably just like, nah, fuck them all, whatever. And so, yeah, if they want to, have their reputations precede them, that obviously will demoralize their opponents. I mean, the other thing that the Solar Throne really like to do is impersonate Githrovan fleets. Because their technology is similar, right? It looks similar, at least initially. And so when you see like some early transports or whatever, or early units for the Solar Throne, some commanders might be forgiven for thinking that that's Githrovan. And they're like, oh, Githrovan, we've got alliances with those people. Let's say hi. And then they just get fucking annihilated. And then the Star Sovereigns show up. Bye. Yeah, the Solar Throne Sovereigns are going to be really insane too anyway, because they'll be able to they'll damage themselves for one, and they'll also just be able to move around while channeling their beams. So if you thought the Star Sovereigns were busted, see ya. I saw the first two films of the new Star Wars trilogy, but I can't really remember much about them. I know that I saw enough of I saw some video essays on the third one, and I know it's just not very interesting. Trying to reserve some names in my head mentally for other regencies. So when I think about something that I actually have a really good name for, it's like, oh shit, I can't use that actually. Well, the ones that are the most like revered are probably the Githrovans because they're like trying to be safeguard, like they're trying to safeguard the whole galaxy and stuff, right? Or really, I should say the universe, because this conflict will probably not be limited to single galaxies. The Ansifi, I assume you're talking about, for big gun monkeys. There's a pretty high amount of moral gray areas. The Githrovans are probably the closest to a good guy faction, but even they, like, they have really good intentions. So does Gadamemter, actually. But the end result is usually not what it seems. You know what I mean? I mean, as well-intentioned as the Githrovan are, they also created the Solar Throne, which is you know, you could say objectively evil force. So their impact hasn't necessarily been in line with what their goals are. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Ansifi, because of the fact that they encapsulate a lot of like the whole human thing as well. So there's a lot there that you can unpack and sort of take in any direction that you really want to. Did I already pick the right icon for this? No. Yeah, sure. I mean, the other thing too is that like the current setups for a lot of the Ember Seed involvement in the initial tutorials are actually they're more like they're almost they're like led by these uncouth sort of temperamental regents, specifically from the Ascosi. The Ascosi are going to be very, like, you could say violent and egotistical, even, potentially. Yeah. There's tons of different things. I mean, that's why, like, Ember Seat factions will actually fight against each other as well. And the thing is, like, so basically the regents have a lot of responsibility and power and pull, because the regents, which are like the catch-all term for commanders in all regencies of Xibalba, basically lead the Ember Seat, and they create embassies by, like, they're basically saying, like, okay, if you send us your units, we will represent your interests. So you'll get a cut of the profits we get from the mining operation, or whatever, like whatever happens here, you'll stand to gain something. So they agree to build the embassy, send the units. That's what gets you the unlocks, right? That's like the RTS mechanical explanation linked with the lore. However, there's not always a lot of really clean communication between individual embassies and stuff, right? So you'll get a situation where you'll have two Ember Seat leaders competing for the same benefit, and even using the same, like, units and embassies and member nations, because they want the glory. Selfishly, the regents themselves want the glory, so they're leading, like, brother and sister, so to speak, against each other from the same regions, from the same member nation, right? So you can basically see where there's, like, a lot of room there for, like, yeah, don't listen to that guy, he's a piece of shit. Like, basically there's room for smaller scale stories about, you could say, drama, interpersonal relationships, without it feeling really contrived and out of place for the setting. Like, in this case, if the scope doesn't include, like, you know, god slaughtering murder machines, like the Solar Throne or whatever, like, okay, then it actually makes sense that we start things off very subtly with some, you know, maybe the first mission of an Ember Seat campaign actually involves some competition against another Ember Seat regent, you know, and, like, he's an Ascosi and you're a Perilli or whatever the fuck. Like, whatever the case may be for the individual races for the Ember Seat. And then as things go on, like, oh, you've actually got to side with this dude because, you know, now some, you know, it's like the classic trope of, like, it starts off as not so friendly competition, but you guys have more in common with each other than with whatever the threat coming around does. That's a very classic, like, video game plot point element that I could probably leverage in a way that isn't going to feel super cliche with the writing, right? And the presentation. So stuff like that I think is pretty neat. I think it'll work out. Yeah, I'm not sure if the Romans ever, like, led armies against one another, but that would basically be kind of like the military equivalent of that sort of political backstabby thing. In this case, it's like, you nailed it with the necessity thing. Like, the Ember Seat have this element where it is necessary for them to band together, because otherwise they'll just get overrun by the more impressive regencies. That doesn't mean they agree, though. That doesn't mean that they want to coexist necessarily. Yeah, everyone looking out for themselves first. Basically. Even the regents that are commanding stuff, right? So, you know, is what it is. But it is pretty, I think it's pretty neat, anyway, as a concept. Certainly does the trick. Where's my Tylar? Here we go. Oh, they did have civil wars. Okay. Yeah, I haven't studied up on my Roman history. So. Yeah, so in that case, it's like it's pretty much exactly like what I imagined for the Ember Seat, but blown up to a galactic scale, right? Massive stellar scale, because that's what we're doing here. Scale, homie. Yeah, I feel like so I felt this way when I was doing the initial planning for the Cosmonarchy setting for Brood War, where I was sort of, like, revising a lot of stuff. And that was one of the things that I wanted to allow for, is, like, a bunch of sub-factions that could be turned against members of their own, other factions of their own races, but also, like, you'd have one faction that really likes it's like very Protoss-philic, you could say, where they really want to, they want to ascend alongside Protoss. And then you have like one faction of Terrans that wants to like, become infested or whatever. And then you have like, faction of Protoss, the Starbound in this case, that are like, they're exiles, so they have to side with whatever they can, which means maybe bending some Zerg to their will, or siding with some Terrans, who also want to ascend in some way. You can find all these interpersonal things. That became way more possible when I made my own setting and came up with 20 regencies and all the different little things that could be done there. So it's basically like a stepping stone in that sense. Oh, I have to link the Tylar, apparently. I probably just didn't add the unit correctly. Yeah. There you go. Oh, I forgot to actually fill it in for the Clarisse. But yeah, the goal is to have a lot of versatility, essentially. It'll be a little bit different when you have some regencies will be a little bit more pigeonholed, but I feel like that's not even necessarily true in the long term. It just means that I need to spend a bit more time thinking about how they can be more, explored in more depth, which is fine. That stuff happens. Yeah, just because they both have like the what would you call it? They both have the sort of like hive mind style thing. It's really funny you mentioned that one specifically because Kian originally gave me the idea of some sort of hive mind foil to the Orlithrae. And that made me think about like, okay, what are the core characteristics of the Orlithrae? They try to combine everything into one sort of organism, but it's like a symbiotic relationship. But they take like something that was originally meant to be a certain way, and then like in some ways you could say they profane it or whatever. In other ways you could just say they augment it, but they change it, irrespectively, right? And then I was thinking like, okay, what would be like the foil to that? And the foil, as long as I also had the idea to make a hive mind with good intentions was one of the ideas that I had based off of that, because the Orlithrae are typically seen as like not evil, but like they result in a lot of carnage. If you're copying if you're imagining and applying the same sort of thing that you would to Zerg, to the Orlithrae, it would be like, oh, these guys just take over the whole place, and they infest and assimilate and destroy, and basically whatever they can't use, they get rid of, right? They attack, and violently so. So they're quite fearsome and unknowable. And, they're like a force of nature almost. You can't reason with them. You can't negotiate with them. And their motives seem to be very, shadowy, and you can't understand them. And so I was thinking about, like, okay, I want a hive mind that absolutely should have a motive that you can understand and even communicates. So there you go, right there, already very different than the Orlithrae, despite being a hive mind. And then I decided it could be a single superconsciousness. Imagine a regency where every unit that you train and every building you build is the guy, is the superintelligence, just a part of it, right? That could be really interesting. So yeah. I mean, that's basically the idea, is that like eventually instead of you speaking to Gadamemter, right? It's Gadamemter speaks to itself because you don't exist anymore. Something like that could be a way to sell the idea, right? So there's definitely ways, like I'm not 100% sure how I'll do it, but there's definitely ways to play around with the concept that I think are very promising, you could say. Oh, I forgot to do a requirement, actually. Owned. There we go. I'll also go into the laybear itself and add the... See ya, Shambleman. What's up, Milestone? I don't know what you mean by campaign segment. We talked about that sort of on and off throughout the entire stream. But what type of or amount of content goes into a campaign? So I don't think there will be too many brand new like campaign specific units, because I do actually want the campaign to not... This shouldn't be the only purpose of the campaign, obviously, but I do want the campaign to prepare you for playing the Regency. Like, it doesn't necessarily need to prepare you explicitly for playing multiplayer, but it should accomplish that goal, because in order to to beat the campaign, really in order to beat any of the maps, you need to be able to play the Regency to a certain degree of skill in order to pass, right? And so early on, that skill requirement will probably be quite small, where maybe just by, even if you're a low skill player, or you've got low familiarity with the Regency, it might just take you longer to beat the mission, but it won't necessarily be massively you're probably not in danger of losing. Essentially, if you're still below the skill threshold, you will lose, but that's sort of one thing to aside. So I don't think I'll have too many like super special cases of like tech tree options that are unique. Especially with so many units, I don't know that I'll ever need that. I think I'll just make it so that obviously like the AI personalities are changed and stuff. So there would be unique AIs per map. Realistically speaking, if it's a repeat character, so you're playing with an AI ally that you've been playing with the whole campaign through, and you're in map 5, that AI is going to have the same tendencies, but different aspects of the map design will change the priority of certain strategies. So a very obvious example from the current planning that I've got for the Ansifi tutorial is chapters 1 and 2 are a little bit more open. Chapter 2 actually requires a bit more transports, space transports, like dropships or whatever, than chapter 1. But there will still be large open courtyards and stuff. Chapter 3, on the other hand, is much more cluttered, you could say. And as a result, early on, even your AI ally, who's probably going to be biased more towards like space vehicles, large vehicle armies, to support his infantry, he's going to be pivoting mostly towards infantry instead. So essentially, he'll adapt to the fact that the map itself is facilitating different strategies. And that's where I think a lot of the changes will come from, is you'll have a lot of biomes, you'll have a lot of like different aspects for the environment. And based on that, you'll have a lot of things that you wouldn't get out of skirmish play, because the environment dictates different strategies to different degrees will be successful, and or have different impact, I guess you could say. So I think there will be a lot of that in the campaigns. But I don't think it will require the generation of new units or anything. That will be pretty infrequent. You might get like in-game representations of heroes or something, for the sake of like in-game cutscenes. And there might be like a cutscene where you defeat an enemy and then he emerges from his last town center, and then you kill him. But even then, I don't think that'll happen. I'd prefer if a character death happens, it's because the player did something, or something happened to a character in-game, and that's just the case. It might seem unceremonious, but I don't think you need some super pomp and circumstance cutscene. I think if you've defeated an opponent, and the end result is that he dies, you probably specifically kill that opponent yourself without it being a cutscene thing. So anyway, that's sort of the idea that I've had. I don't think there will be like tech tree specific changes. I do think there will be a lot of like non-standard maps where the terrain is different or the objective is different or something to that effect. There's a lot of terrain interactivity where there's going to be some Ansifi units that can remove cliffs from the equation. They can like dig into cliffs and in some cases completely remove them if it's an isolated area or given enough time, which is going to allow you to take that cluttered map, the chapter 3 of the tutorial that I was talking about earlier, to take this map and then clear out the way for bigger vehicles to get through. So there'll be stuff like that you can do, more or less. So hopefully that answers your question, but feel free to ask for more information if you still have something on your mind. Let's go back to the schism here. So I have to add successor. Well, we're not going to have 3D tools for in-game. So if we have cutscenes, they will be pre-rendered. And I'm pretty sure we'll certainly want to, but the question will be like, what's within budget? What's realistic? The story will be communicated mostly through gameplay. So if you have a situation where, for example, you're fighting Ember Seat, and Ember Seat are designed, this particular Ember Seat player likes to go frontal when normally Ember Seat are more on the side steps. You'll have some dialogue that maybe sets you up incorrectly with your expectations, like, Ember Seat are here. Well, watch your resource lines. Those bastards love to harass you or whatever. And they'll be, I'll write that a little bit more gracefully than my off the cuff dialogue line impersonation. And then maybe they just start rolling in with the frontal stuff. And then based on the characters' reactions and dialogue, you'll naturally understand some more stuff about the world. But for the most part, you'll get story information based on the actual experience of playing the game, because like characterization of the opponents and of your allies, their personality is going to come through in the actual way that they command units and stuff. I suppose in-game cutscenes will be pretty minuscule, and it's kind of debatable if you would even call them cutscenes, because it would be stuff like your structures land and your infantry come out of drop pods at the beginning of a game, and you get control, and that whole process takes like 2 seconds. I don't even know if you would call that a cutscene. It's more like an intro component or something, because it'll probably be pretty consistent throughout all of the missions. And then the outro, there will probably just be dialogue events as you wrap things up. Maybe in some cases you'll actually see, army movements or something. And that'll be like more like the Brood War cutscene or whatever. But I think even those will be fairly sparse, because the whole idea is that you've been victorious in defeating the enemy, so there's not really that much of the enemy left, Oh yeah, sure. Feel free to send them over, Knight of the Realm. Just check to see if this worked correctly. Okay. Oh yeah, I should remove the units from the falsehood, or the lay bear. Where's that? Get rid of these. Okay. All right. So I think we got everything taken care of there. I definitely wasn't massively focused because I spent a lot of time chatting, but it was still useful in that sense. And I do enjoy talking about my own shit. So it's not like it was a bad experience whatsoever. But we did add the Ewinata, and we added the Olatir, and we added the Falsehood of the Testament, the Laybear. So, and we moved the Reliquary and shuffled around some other stuff. So yeah, I think that's pretty good stuff anyway. Shuffling this stuff around and figuring out more information about how the Sycora tech map is actually going to progress it's quite important. I do think that the story communication being through snippy, short dialogue events, or I should say snappy, I guess, quick, terse dialogue events that are subversive in nature, because they tell you information about the character that's delivering the line. You get the voice acting to give you the intonation and stuff, but the writing will also tell you like the way that it's delivered is like how that character talks, and if they're talking really aggressively, maybe they're an aggressive character in game, right? It can be more complex than this, but that's just an example. So you'll get information about the character, you'll get information about whatever they're talking about. Maybe they're talking about a specific enemy faction, and you'll get some sort of like subtle world building information on, based on this character and what they've seen, their take on the other regency is probably accurate if their experience. So the information they say, can be trusted in that sense. And so it's like adding a little bit of world building there. And then you're also getting important gameplay information for like what the enemy might be doing or what to look out for. And all of those things can be accomplished in the time span of like a single dialogue line. Like a guy saying, watch your mineral line, buddy. You got some enemies coming, or whatever. So that's like one example, right? So there will be dialogue that delivers that sort of information there. And then you'll also be taking in the environment for a lot of the storytelling and taking in the, not just the dialogue and the reactions and stuff, but the actual enemy compositions and how they're using them. For the personality of the characters. So I think a lot of that will combine to create a very dynamic but also organic way of telling a story through an RTS in a way that's respectful of the player's time. Will there be briefings? Probably. We need some sort of way to literally brief the player about information. It would be nice if we could get like introductory cutscenes to every single mission, because that would allow the player to sort of skip those if they want to get straight into the ready room, which is where you'll be able to do your pre-planning, which means like essentially your pre-building phase. You can specify what units you want where and what buildings you want where and all that stuff, where you want to start the mission if more options are available to you than just one, which for the tutorial they won't be. But stuff like that will basically be like the ready room is there. That's where your objectives will be, and you'll also be able to replay the intro cutscene if you want to, because you missed something or you accidentally skipped it or whatever. So you'll see your objectives, you'll see the pre-planning, you'll have a button to replay the intro, and once you're satisfied with whatever you got, you can start the mission, and then the mission begins. So it's kind of like a way for the player to somehow have some interaction in the experience before they've even begun playing, and they can also just choose to tune out the information about the characters and stuff if they really just want to like maybe replay the mission for the umpteenth time or whatever. But I'm not 100% sure how we'll handle characters, or how we'll handle cutscenes. If we decided to go the briefing route from Brood War, that would be mostly because of budget things, I think. Not because I'm not imaginative enough to make something happen. So we'll have to see. Maybe we can whip something up in Unreal or whatever. These references you sent me in Out of the Realm are a lot more humanoid or earthly than I would probably want the Rosellium to be, but the colors are kind of interesting. Similar to the Wings of Liberty Ready Room. I'm trying to think about what that was. I guess I told you like a quick line of dialogue from the characters that were involved in the mission, and then told you what new units you would get. But I don't think you got a chance to do anything interactive there, right? So yeah, it would sort of like that, I guess. But yeah, No, I know they're not for Rosellium. You were sending me some stuff from a faction that you planned. Right, yeah, okay. Yeah, I was just commenting on what they were then. All right, well, I'm pretty satisfied with the progress today. I will be bailing out now. It's been about 3 hours, a little bit over. We don't mind going above 3 in this neck of the woods, except I do right now because I really have to use the bathroom. So, I will be out of here. Thanks everybody for popping in. It was a pretty popular stream today compared to normal. Hope you guys enjoy the clips that come out of this one. And besides that, I'll be back in 2 days for another one. And tomorrow, Veek will be doing his engine stream stuff. So maybe pop in for that one if you like. And yeah, I think that's it.